When I used to work for another newspaper before the Sunday World, when things were quiet during the summer, as they can be, as you know, when the courts are off and the politicians are away, we used to get sent down to Mountjoy with a photographer to try and get pictures of people chucking drugs over the wall. But I suppose that's probably a skill that's going to die.
I remember doing the exact same thing. There was one particular guy with his tennis balls and knew exactly where to launch it outside the Doka Centre and would barely break stride. And you imagine if he was spotted by a baseball scout, he would have been signed on the spot. Such as his arm and accuracy. But
like a lot of us, Eamon, in this digital era, his previous skills are being undone by technology, because we've had, and there's a number of cases coming before the courts, but we've had this new method of delivery, which is really drone technology.
Yeah, and I mean, you only have to look what's going on in Ukraine to see that it's going through generations of changes very quickly. And, for every time there's countermeasures taken, whether it's jamming frequencies or using simple netting or whatever, the people are coming up with ways to combat them. So there's a little bit of an arms race going on between the baddies, I suppose, or the people trying to deliver the drugs and the IPS, and it's ongoing, and I mean, you've had situations where in some of the bigger prisons, you've had a first drone will turn up with a flaming rag or a flaming tennis ball or something like this and drop it on the net. That makes a hole, and then a faster, nippier one zooms in and drops the packet with the pills in for the guys underneath, and it's all perfectly timed and choreographed, and makes it difficult for anyone to combat that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds almost unbelievable, but we have actually heard this detailed in courts, because obviously the drones can fly over the prisons. They're clearly not meant to. I mean, I think it's a criminal offence in of itself. Is it just even flying over them?
Yeah, well, there was always certain prisons, certainly ones that had dissidents or IRA in the past. There was no-fly zones, and that meant no aircraft could fly over them.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm not quite sure of the rules and regulations. There is a bit of a kind of a lacuna or whatever, a shadow or whatever around all that. Without a doubt, if you're trying to carry out some kind of reconnaissance, or if you're trying to smuggle stuff in, that in itself is a crime. Yeah, you're basically not allowed to do that if you're conspiring to smuggle drugs.
Exactly,
so it'd be a straightforward one there.
So, I mean, obviously, we're speaking about the drone, the attempts to smuggle contraband, because we've done a story about in Portlaoise prison. Just, I suppose, the level of skill that's being generated. Like, obviously, the nets are the biggest barrier to getting something over the wall. People have, as we said, have been throwing them over for years, but there's this constant netting being put up that's meant to catch them. And I think people have said, if you're in the prison, sometimes you can actually look up and see packages that have got stuck
or landed in the wrong part, or the hole wasn't. And
how does it basically work? Like, somebody throws it in and
I mean the most basic level, it was people just throwing something in, and there was all sorts of different ingenious ways, like putting them into tomatoes that would rot and eventually the packet would fall out. Yeah. Which sounds a bit slow, and putting them, in frozen packets on hot days that it'll melt and the smaller packet will float down. Putting in kind of long, thin, weighted, almost like a dart. Yeah. So that it'll go nose down and be small enough to get through the holes in the nets as well. So. And then
is it just picked up, like it's obviously addressed to Mr.
Well, I'm sure, like, if the way they work, if you pick up some drugs and they weren't meant for you, you're going to be paying for them one way or another. I mean, there's no two ways around it. So it's pretty clear, if you find something, you give it to who you're supposed to give it to when you're on exercise, because then they'll know that something has gone in, and the last person in the exercise yard was you,
and you'll be spotted.
And you're gonna hand it over.
And there's nobody rats as much to each other as criminals anyway. So
I mean, there is the hierarchy there, and all joking aside, I mean, we saw that. I mean, like the Dundons, the three Dundon brothers who are serving life for murder, like, haven't stopped being criminal, organisers. I mean, there's been so many cases of them being connected and suspected of various plots and smuggling rings and all in the different prisons they've been in, whether it's been Mountjoy or Portlaoise, that they've constantly been getting in trouble. Yeah. And we've seen in the past how they manipulate and bully other prisoners. We've seen pictures of guys that were put up on social media. It was all a big joke when they're sitting, with lipstick on his face and stuff like this. And it's a clear signal to people, like, do what you're told. And I mean, even kind of the recent one, the information that we have so far, in Portlaoise, which is like the high security prison, which, you know, up until recently has had, you know, a kind of a full complement of army, which is being reduced now because there's so few dissidents left there that there's no need for the army. So, I mean, the extra surveillance that they would have provided is gone. And it does look like drones are getting in there. And, you know, when one of the suspects in this particular case, as to who was receiving it, like, was, you know, referred to in a court case as being easily manipulated, and found himself in that prison for the same reason, that he owed money. He had a huge drug debt and was basically one of these people who did what he was told without thinking through the consequences. So here he is, it seems, in prison doing the same thing again. And it's, you know, it's people connected to the Limerick gangs. It's people who are serving lengthy sentences for their part in Kinhen cartel criminal conspiracies who are controlling this, because it's the business they're in. They're drug dealers, and okay, it mightn't be as big a market, but you're getting 3 times the price, and I suppose it gives them something to do, and money is power as well.
It does. I mean, I think it allows them to sort of control their environment, having access to drugs. And there is a belief, even in this case, that there's obviously perspex windows in some of the jails, and that people might be sort of, because drone technology, I don't know if you've tried operating a drone like
I haven't.
Well, it's
I'm not confessing.
No, well, exactly. No, it's harder than it looks, actually. But, you know, I'm sure people can get really good at it, because you can obviously, you have a video screen so you can see where you're going. And in this case, they're talking about being able to direct it to individual windows that even might be melted, because I think they're perspex, is it?
Yeah, in the past, like they've been able to, I mean, even kind of pre-drone technology, there were perspex windows at one stage that were in some of the prisons that they were able to melt, you know, a hole in, you know, using say the element from their in-cell kettle, or using a lighter or whatever. Now, a lot of the prison estate now would have changed to these kind of far more secure windows. I think they're called Limerick windows, and there's vents so that prisoners can open or close them for fresh air. But it's not necessarily accessible. They're not perspex, but I think they are actually glass, so they're not going to melt them. Yeah. So, but there is going to be there's going to be some landings in some parts of the prison system, where that still occurs. But I mean, the drones going directly to window is only one kind of issue. I mean, remember years ago there was a story that we did, and it was actually, I think it was either the Midlands or Portlaoise prison, and it was kind of the first time, but they were using leaded or, you know, weighted fishing line and throwing them across, and somebody pulling in through, you know, a hole in the window, and setting up a little zip line to basically send across packages, you know. So I mean, I suppose the point we're making is that, you know, there's a continual way of looking for a weak spot to bring something in. You know, whether it's in through the laundry van, or whether it's in with, you know, it's in with deliveries, and, you know, we've seen all that in the past. Or sometimes, you know, there's prison staff who've been, you know, compromised, who've been either bribed or coerced into cooperating with gangs, and to allow them or help them, you know, set things in motion. And it's, you know, it's a dirty business in a way, and the rewards are there for people who are willing to take the risk.
It allows them to control sort of their environment totally, having access to both the phones and the drugs. I mean, of course, all of it sort of begs the question, and, you know, why don't they just put up some sort of blocker? Now, and I know that question has also arisen about mobile phones. You know, obviously people are using contraband mobile phones in prisons. We all know that. We've all seen pictures from inside cells. I mean, they have tried, haven't they, some of these technological solutions, which would have been obviously that nobody within the radius of the prison, like they wouldn't get a signal, basically.
Yeah. I think there's different issues with that. I mean, part of it is that there are certain members of staff who need to be able to be in contact with the outside world, you know, medical staff and people like that. I mean, like, it's an offence for anyone to have a mobile phone in a prison. Like, it's putting us up to 5 years. So that includes anybody going into a prison.
Officers, when they go in, don't they? They have to hand them over.
Yeah, they'll put them in their locker or whatever, and visitors will leave them in their car or put them in a locker or whatever it is. And even say, like, care workers coming in, or medical staff, like, will have to pretty much do the same thing. Yeah. But you know, there will be sections of the prison, obviously, like the governor's office or an administration building, where mobile phones are allowed, or that. So it's a difficult thing, and there will always be a way around it, you know. And I mean, like, we do know at one stage there was talk of people like John Gilligan had access to satellite phones that were going to stop any kind of the older style of mobile phones being blocked. So, I mean, people at the high end of, I suppose, organised crime are always going to find a way. Even somebody's going to set up a Wi-Fi server in the ditch outside or whatever they need to do.
Yeah.
They'll find a way.
And of course, a lot of our prisons are bang in the city centre. I mean, obviously, Mountjoy is in one of the most built-up areas in the city, right across the road from Mater Hospital. So,
and it's the same, like Limerick Prison is the same, because they're all old prisons. Portlaoise is the same.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all surrounded by, civilians living normal lives in their normal housing estates.
And I mean, you block a couple of signals from Mountjoy and you might be blocking off the Mater Hospital across the road.
All the emergency services.
I mean, I know they did trial some of that at one point. I think they trialled it in sort of Wheatfield, Port Clover Hill. I can't remember the exact outcome of it, but I think there was a technological problem to blocking it. And I presume the same arises for drones are controlled, through.
Yeah, I mean, they're like what do they call it? Electronic warfare, in Ukraine and Russia. And I mean, and that's constantly changing. You'll see one side will have an advantage for a week and will be able to launch thousands of drones, and then next week they can't launch any because someone's come up with a tweak to the technology they're able to exploit.
And I think that they have done the anti-drone technology in the prisons again. It just mustn't be.
Yeah, no, and it worked for a while. And I suppose, I imagine the frustration from the point of view, if you were in the Irish prison services, the fact that people are able to simply access this.
Yeah.
I mean, like, why do you really need a tiny high-speed drone that has a frequency jammer or whatever it is, or has multiple, bits and pieces to it, so it changes its own frequency, and if it is blocked, it's only for half a second or a millisecond or whatever it is. I don't know the correct terminology, but why should someone have that? I mean, it's
why should mobile phone companies make tiny little inch-long mobile phones that are all made of plastic?
What's it called? The boss phone? Beat the boss, and the boss being the body orifices scanner, I think it is.
And they're basically tiny phones.
I've seen them. They're kind of thumb size.
Thumb size.
And I think there was it? I think Nicola might have carefully written about how Wayne Dundon, when he was transferred from one prison to another, he didn't pass the metal test on the boss chair, and so he was put into solitary confinement. Presumably, this was a boss phone that he'd concealed somewhere. And and that's how it works in prisons, unfortunately.
Yeah, and of course there are consequences, and those consequences, aren't just the fact that prisoners shouldn't be maybe allowed or the country doesn't want them to be taking drugs and having a good time in prison. I mean, the consequences are increasingly severe, and the prison service are doing their best to highlight these risks, because what is getting into prisons in recent times are a lot of these opioid substitutes, basically. We have the nitrazine. There was, I think it was 11 overdoses, was there?
There was 11, and I think then there was 7 then recently as well in the Midlands with, I think it was a form of spice, which itself is a synthetic cannabinoid or synthetic cannabis, so it's a cannabinoid. Can't even say those words. But and I mean, and people don't know the strength, or it's the strength is unknown. And like this nitazine, then I think part of the problem, we spoke about this before, that it's not being presented as nitazine, it's being presented as benzos or some other kind of tablet. So people who aren't necessarily looking for an opiate type hit are actually, taking a completely different drug, and they wouldn't have necessarily any resistance to it.
No.
There's a regular use of might, and it's causing people's respiratory system to shut down. And you've had these incredible emergencies. It must have been very difficult for anyone to deal with the chaos that would ensue, if you've suddenly got 10 unconscious prisoners.
Yeah, exactly. And even the spice, I mean, God only knows, if it qualifies as spice. I mean, I think the problem is that a lot of these drugs, and they're just getting mixed up altogether. There's obviously no quality control. I know if you're in Electric Picnic, you can get your drugs tested to see if it's, I mean, that's a service that is offered. It certainly isn't happening in the prison service. And, a lot of these overdoses are coming from these drugs that are, as you said, people don't know what's in them.
Well, you'd imagine thinking that, a drug dealer on the outside, if they're sending stuff on to the inside, that they'd be sending over stuff that's already been well tested by their own customers and should have some idea.
Yeah.
But I mean, you do wonder, I mean, it's just that, I mean, there is so many ways, like, from prisoners returning from say compassionate leave, being forced to, pack their bodies with tablets or whatever. And, like for a time stuff was being, impregnated into things like photographs and paper and fused with that.
Yeah.
And then they found a scanner then that detected all this, and you could find, whether it was clothes or other items that were tainted with drugs that could be then, I suppose, distilled from them for use. Like, and that immediately overnight stopped that route.
Yeah.
And, it was a fairly simple technology. And like in the past, you've had things like the dogs, the sniffer dogs, they're usually passive ones that they'll just sit at your feet when you're walking in, and kind of the advice is don't come into prison, go away. If you do, you'll get searched and the guards will be called. And I mean, and sometimes, but I mean, that's limited. I mean, you find with the dogs, it's intensive kind of work, and they're limited to how many times you can let them do this, because for a dog it's a game and they get bored and tired and just stop doing it if you overwork them. So, but I imagine they would have an effect psychologically on people. I remember actually one time watching a dog being demonstrated in Dublin Airport, and just a line of people, coming off a flight from London, and they were all told to kind of, as they were disembarking, to walk up just on one side of the corridor while the dog waited for them. And the number of people that kind of suddenly stiffened and like tried not to freeze or look suspicious as they walked past the dog. They had no reason to.
No.
And then there was another demonstration where he went looking for a case full of cannabis in the luggage and was successful and got his tennis ball to play with. I
mean, no matter, sometimes the prison service get criticised when it emerges that there's contraband in prisons. And of course, look, nobody thinks it's a good idea that it is, but like, it really is a worldwide problem that, because criminals are so committed to committing crime, really, the ability to stop it. And I suppose the technology keeps helping the criminals, really,
Yeah, and I mean, like, the amount of drugs you need to smuggle in now to get, a hit on X amount of people is tiny compared to what it would have been one time. So, I mean, it's not like, a drone has to carry a kilo of powder in. They can, it can be a simple, a vial of tiny tablets, or a single rolled up sheet of paper.
Yeah,
that'll have enough drugs to keep 100 people happy for a week.
Yeah,
and that's just the difference. Like, it's just easier in that sense.
Yeah,
but then again, as we see, it's leading to these kind of mass overdosing events, which must really have to change the way they work. I think now they'll have some of those. Is it Naxalone for the
Naxalone,
to help revive people? I think that there's training now, and it's being used. It's a nasal spray. We've seen it very effective in the US.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's all kind of new work for prison officers to take on, in fairness to them.
Absolutely. And they've been very open and kind of, and in issuing warnings through the media, through family and people that will have know people in prison, to sort of stop these things escalating, I think it is effectively an impossibility to stop all contraband going into jails, and even in jails, the most extreme security measures in the US haven't managed to stop it. Where there's a will, there's a way. But all of that said, I mean, I thought there was another story from Patrick O'Connell that, where you can understand small amounts of drugs maybe being swallowed or taken internally. The fact that somebody got caught with a George Foreman grill, I thought was...
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
There was some tasty food, I think, as well, wasn't there?
Well, rashers and sausages.
Yeah, there you go. Like, that's the stuff you miss, like, You don't want to get powdered eggs every morning, like, it's time to get something tasty again.
Don't know if somebody, George Foreman grill got bought in by drone, which would
It'd be a hefty drone, all right.
It would be a hefty drone. But I mean, I suppose, and it was compared to the famous scene, obviously, in Goodfellas, where you have the mafia guys in jail, and it looks like they're
making the perfect bolognese sauce and discussing their great grandmother's recipes and all the rest, and enjoying the best of it. Like, there was, I don't know if you remember, it must have been nearly 15, 16 years ago, when I think Gilligan was still in the E-landing in Portlaoise prison. And if you remember, John Daly rang Liveline, and there was a big search of the wing then as a result of that. And there was something like, I don't know, there was a dozen phones taken, and there was a prisoner's canary was taken off him. But these are things that actually, the canary, I think, had been kind of granted permission for, but they decided that, there was no more kind of enhanced privileges being allowed. But there was a kitchen at the end of the landing, which is a full fitted kitchen, which had been paid for by prisoners' families themselves. And there was regularly a shopping list made up, and they were sent out, and there was steaks and beef bourguignon and all sorts of very tasty foods being cooked on a daily basis. So they were having the best of their culinary. They weren't eating the ordinary gastro.
No porridge. Let's put it that way.
There was no porridge. Yeah. So I mean, it's a great way. I would imagine, like if you're in the prison system, a way of enhancing a prisoner's regime is that they can then have control over their own food. If somebody's willing to send them in a steak or two, once a week or a month or whatever, you got a little treat going there.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's better than contraband phones anyway, for sure.
Yes. Never pick up a second-hand one in prison.
Yes. Well, thanks, Eamon. We'll come back to this because there's a number of interesting cases coming before the courts in relation to the drones being, and contraband being brought into prisons. And I will bring up kind of novel legal issues. So no doubt we'll come back to it then.
No worries. Always a pleasure, Niall.
Thanks, Eamon.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.